Chapter 9. North to Canada. Joe bought a large surplus army tent for next to nothing at a flea market in La Junta. It was from World War II. It had large sections that were ripped and full of holes. It smelled of mildew. It came without holes, just the cloth. He spread it out on the dusty bare ground in the backyard between the incinerator circle and the garden. "What do you think you're going to do with that moldy old thing?" Rosie demanded. "You're worried I'm thinking about us living in it in Canada, aren't you?" Joe responded. "Well, yeah. I wouldn't put it past you. That's just the kind of old-time cowboy you seem to think you are." "No, we won't be using it as a tent." "I was kind of hoping it might still work as a tent, for going hunting. But it's clearly too far gone for that. Now I'm just hoping I can cut out a good enough piece to cover the stock racks on the pickup. We'll get rained on, driving all the way to Canada. Gotta have some way to keep our crap from getting wet." Joe spent a couple of Sundays cutting, sewing up holes, and forming seams with thick white cotton string and a large saddle needle. Then he coated all the large white stitches with ugly, smelly, crimson-colored rubber auto engine gasket sealant. Finally, he fitted it over the tall 6-foot by 5-foot steel stock racks in the back of their light blue 1957 Ford pickup. He stood back and surveyed the covered vehicle. Rosie walked up and stood beside him, her hands on her hips. "Well, it doesn't look like much, but it should last for the trip at least," Joe stated. "It looks like shit," Rosie replied, then walked back into the house without another word. Steve frowned and walked all the way around the pickup, surveying the rough olive drab and sick red sutures, forming a dark, patched cube on the back of the sky blue pickup. His dad growled, "Yeah, it looks like the grapes of wrath, I guess. I'll be damned if I'll do anything else with it. I'm done fooling with it. Don't know why we're leaving for Canada anyway, GD women." A few days later, they packed up as much as they could into the back of the 57 sky blue pickup with olive drab cube, sporting ugly crimson sutures covering it. Most of the furniture was left behind. That was the day when Steve got off the bus from kindergarten and found his father loading boxes into the back of the 1957 Ford pickup. Steve went into the house and found it mostly empty. "Where is everything?" he asked his mother. "Well, it's all packed up. We're moving to Canada. Your daddy and I have been talking about moving for a long time, and it turns out that today is the day," she replied cheerfully. Steve was horror-stricken. He walked outside and tried to talk to his father about the move. His father finally said, "Steve, I'm busy. Go ask your mother. This was her idea anyway." Steve ran back into the house and saw his mother busily packing the last few boxes. He felt that his life was out of control. It was like a nightmare that he could not stop dreaming, no matter how hard he tried to wake up. They were leaving the drug place just like that, to some faraway place called Canada. No one had told him they were going to move. He could not believe it. He could not face leaving the only home he had known for his first 5 years. Steve found a box of greasy gear parts and spent shotgun shells. He became absorbed with his newfound treasure and took them out in the yard to play. He pretended they were very important, powerful machines. His mind wandered away from the chaos he had come home to. When his parents ordered him to leave the gears and get in the pickup, he rebelled. "No, I don't want to go. I want to stay here. I want to build things with these," he insisted as he held up the 2 gears. His father said sternly, "No, Steve, we haven't got any room left for those worn-out things. You can keep the shotgun shells if you want. Come on now, it's getting late. We should have been on the road hours ago. Go get in the pickup with Clyde." Steve gathered up as many of the dark green shells as he could manage and trudged out to the pickup. He climbed up into the cab with his brother and sat staring for a long time at the little tin-roofed shack that was the only home he'd ever known. The 4 Gandys sat arrayed on the pickup truck's bench seat, no seatbelts, worn-out engine. 1,700 miles of the unknown stretched before them. Maximum speed, 50 miles per hour. At that slow speed, it was a long journey of many days to traverse the Rocky Mountains, cross many river valleys, and generally kept moving always northward. As Joe drove the Grapes of Wrath cube through Spokane, Washington, he became increasingly anxious and slipped into the grip of autistic defense mode. He started having problems shifting gears and at one point completely froze up, locking the brakes in the middle of an intersection. He was sweating with his teeth clenched, completely overwhelmed in a city of so many thousands of people. Rosie spoke to him calmly and encouraged him to drive on through the intersection and park as soon as possible. After a full minute of cars honking at the stopped pickup truck, Joe was able to put it back in gear and creep through. He parked immediately. Steve timidly asked, "What's wrong, Dad?" Joe did not respond. Rosie leaned over close to Steve's face and whispered, "Don't bother your daddy right now. He needs to calm down. You and Clyde stay quiet until I tell you it's okay to speak." After about an hour, Joe recovered and slowly drove out of the city. He was never willing to speak of these breakdowns, though Rosie encouraged him to talk about it. Part 2, Chapter 10, Gang Ranch. Rosie was unhappy. The gang ranch manager, Wade Rollins, had assigned the Gandy family as a unit to a very remote post called Bear Creek. It was located in the mountain range northwest of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia, Canada. The area Joe would tend cattle was near the very northwestern edge of the ranch's extensive holdings. In 1966, Gang Ranch was known for being the third largest ranch in the world. The Gandys were housed in a sod roof, one-room cabin with an adjoining tack shed and corrals. They were located high in a mountain cirque. The ranch manager sent a young ranch hand named Clifton Fumeron with them to tend cattle on this remote range. Rosie voiced her uneasiness with the trip and the place. The place was located high up in a small cirque valley on a very high mountain. The drive up to that beautiful little valley had been a treacherous climb, up rutted log skid trails in a four-wheel drive truck supplied by the ranch. They pulled a small horse trailer with 2 quarter horses and tack inside. Rosie was sipping soup with each hairpin turn. A few days after they moved into the cabin, Steve explored a thin, dark stream in the middle of a meadow 100 feet away, in front of the cabin. He felt a fast-swimming trout slap a smooth, scaleless body against his hand. It startled Steve. He jumped up and looked deep into the dark, narrow channel. He saw the darker shapes of several fish go flitting by in the ice-cold stream. He looked up and saw a large, furry black bear with a tan and black nose. It was standing on all fours, stock still and simply looking at Steve as it made its way between the cabin and the tack shed. Nobody was around. His mother and brother were inside the cabin, and his dad and Clifton were off riding. Steve did not move, but he also did not feel any fear in his 6-year-old body. As he watched it, the bear seemed to lose interest in the little boy and ambled off down the stream, about 12 feet away, passing by without making a sound. Clifton was rude and untidy. Rosie found him repulsive. He chewed tobacco and never bathed. She also strongly suspected that he kept a bottle of alcohol somewhere among his few belongings. He slept in the barn. The 5 of them remained together for most of the summer of 1966. Clifton was the only person the Gandys ever saw there. Together, Joe and Clifton were responsible for keeping track of hundreds of head of cattle. There were no fences to limit the roaming of the cows, so they rode around the perimeter of the rangelands regularly and kept wanderers inside the herd. Bear Creek was a remote, enchanted outpost on the edge of a vast wilderness in the Canadian Cascade Mountains. Most nights were clear, as there were no electric lights for many miles, nor people to watch them. On moonless nights, they would wander out of the cabin after supper and look up into a brilliant ocean of stars. Supper, as well as all other meals, was prepared by Rosie on the big wood-burning cook stove in the cabin. After the sun went down, they lit a kerosene lamp. Water they carried in buckets from the stream, which was an easier chore than it had been at the Droke place, because the stream was closer than the windmill had been. A big plus was the fresh, pure water, as opposed to the hard alkaline water on the high plains. Steve felt excited about living in such an interesting place. He thought it quite novel to sleep in the same room as his parents, with only a suspended blanket separating their sleeping area from his and his brother's space. He felt close to the earth and at peace with nature at Bear Creek. The shrubs and little trees growing on the roof made the log cabin look as if it was growing out of the mountain. He did not mind using the outhouse there. He sensed no danger in his surroundings. Some days, Joe and Clifton would take the four-wheel drive pickup down to the hayfields farther down the mountain. The marshy ground there could not sustain heavy farm machinery, as one foreman had found when he had been sent a Caterpillar from headquarters a year before. The large, heavy earth mover had sunk out of sight in a matter of hours and had to be dug out with days of manual labor. So they used a team of horses hitched to a primitive sickle cutting machine that was no doubt very popular at the turn of the 19th century. When the day came in early September for the herd to be moved back into the valley land, no one wanted to leave. Nonetheless, the heavy snows were coming. They packed the contents of the cabin into the four-wheel drive pickup and drove carefully down the trail road back to civilization. The ranch manager's name was Rollins. He was a fellow U.S. citizen, and he took an immediate liking to Joe. He assigned the Gandys to the plantation house for the winter. It was about 5 miles from headquarters. The place was called the plantation because it had originally been built just that. A wealthy homesteader had built a big house on the sprawling farmland around the turn of the century. Gang Ranch used the plantation to house 2 worker families. The 2 families were completely separated by a hallway with doors on each end. The home had been built with traditional Victorian architecture. It had high ceilings, thick walls, and elaborate moldings. The Gandys' part of the house even had 2 small fireplaces. Sometimes Rosie would tell the boys scary stories about her hobgoblins that she said she kept in the chimneys. She warned them that they better eat their dinners, take their naps, and behave, or she would call down the hobgoblins to get them. Steve always kept a watchful eye on the fireplaces and was careful not to turn his back on them. He was never certain about when his mother was telling him the truth or just a story she made up. Sometimes the way she told one of her stories was so convincing, Steve wondered later if she thought her stories were true. After supper one night, Joe mentioned to Rosie that the headquarters was looking for a substitute cook at the cookhouse. One of the cooks was leaving to visit her family and would be gone for quite a while. Rosie became excited about the news.